"What's your call sign, old-timer?" The young Navy SEAL's question was casual, almost friendly, as he noticed the faded trident tattoo on the elderly man's weathered arm at the VA clinic waiting room. The old veteran, sitting quietly in his wheelchair, his left leg missing below the knee, looked up with tired eyes. His response was barely a whisper. "Ghost 1." The young SEAL's face went completely white. His clipboard clattered to the floor. Within seconds, he was standing at rigid attention, and every veteran in that waiting room suddenly understood they were in the presence of a legend who shouldn't have survived, but did, and changed naval special warfare forever. If this moves you, type "respect" in the comments. Marcus Webb had been coming to this VA clinic in San Diego for 17 years, ever since the improvised explosive device in Fallujah took his leg and ended his career at age 45. He was 62 now, gray-haired, his body carrying the weight of too many operations and too much pain. He kept to himself mostly, arriving early for his physical therapy appointments, sitting in his wheelchair in the corner of the waiting room where he could see both exits, an old habit that never died. He wore simple clothes, a faded San Diego Padres cap, and he never talked about his service unless directly asked. To most people at the clinic, he was just another disabled vet, one of thousands who cycled through seeking treatment, managing pain, trying to reclaim pieces of themselves left on foreign battlefields. That morning, the waiting room was crowded. Marcus sat near the window, watching pigeons on the sidewalk outside, when a young man in Navy PT gear entered, clearly there for a medical screening. The SEAL trident was tattooed on his forearm, fresh ink, probably less than a year since he'd earned it. Marcus recognized the look, that confidence bordering on arrogance that came with surviving buds, the swagger of youth and elite training. The young SEAL couldn't have been more than 26, scanned the room and took a seat near Marcus, nodding politely the way young service members sometimes did to older veterans out of general courtesy. He pulled out paperwork, started filling out forms, clearly impatient with the wait. Marcus returned his attention to the window, content to be invisible. But the young SEAL noticed Marcus's forearm where his sleeve had ridden up, revealing the edge of a tattoo, an old trident, Vietnam-era ink, the kind that had been done in field conditions with whatever was available, faded now to blue-gray against weathered skin. Below it, partially visible, were numbers and what looked like coordinates. The young SEAL's expression shifted from boredom to curiosity, then to something like professional respect. He'd been taught to honor those who'd come before, the SEALs who'd forged the brotherhood in jungles and rivers before modern warfare. "Sir," he said, his voice respectful but casual, "I see you were teams. What era did you serve?" Marcus glanced at him, measuring whether he wanted this conversation. "Long time ago, son. Vietnam, Mekong Delta." The young SEAL nodded appreciatively. "That's hardcore, sir. My instructors talked about Delta operations. Heavy action." Marcus simply nodded, hoping that would end it, but the young SEAL, like many of his generation, had been raised on SEAL history, on legends and tales of impossible missions. He gestured toward Marcus's tattoo. "If you don't mind me asking, sir, what was your call sign?" It was a question born of genuine curiosity and respect, the way SEALs connected across generations through the operational names that defined them. Call signs were earned, not given, usually reflecting something about a mission or a skill or a moment that captured who you were in combat. To the young SEAL, it was just friendly conversation, a way to honor an old veteran's service. Marcus hesitated, his jaw tightening slightly. He rarely spoke his call sign aloud anymore. Too many memories, too much weight, but something about the young man's earnest face, his genuine respect, made Marcus decide to answer. "Ghost 1, he said quietly, his voice barely audible. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. The young SEAL's eyes went wide, his face draining of all color. His clipboard slipped from his hands, hitting the linoleum floor with a sharp crack that made several people look up. He stood up so fast his chair scraped backward, and before Marcus could process what was happening, the young man snapped to rigid attention, his body aligned in perfect military posture, his eyes fixed forward. "Sir," his voice was tight, almost strangled with shock and sudden understanding. The waiting room fell silent, confused by the sudden intensity. An older veteran across the room, probably late 70s, wearing a Vietnam veteran cap, looked sharply at Marcus, his eyes narrowing in recognition. "Jesus Christ," the older vet whispered. "Ghost One. No way. I thought you were dead." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the one that came when the past pushed its way into the present uninvited. "At ease, son," he said softly to the young SEAL. "That was a lifetime ago." But the young man didn't relax. His hands were trembling slightly at his sides. "Sir, I need to apologize. I had no idea. They told us you died in 2003. We studied your operations at Coronado. You're literally the first lesson in advanced tactical planning, Operation Phantom River. April 1971. You led a 4-man team 90 miles up the Mekong, infiltrated a North Vietnamese command center, extracted intelligence on POW locations, and evaded a 3-day manhunt by over 200 enemy soldiers. You radioed for extraction 17 times. Every time, you were told it was impossible. The area was too hot. So you walked out, all 4 of you, 78 miles through hostile territory. It took you 12 days. The young SEAL's voice was gaining strength now, fueled by the awe of standing, before someone he'd believed was myth. The intelligence you brought back led to the rescue of 43 American POWs over the next 6 months. 43 men came home because of what you did. Your tactics are still taught. The Ghost Protocol for Deep Penetration Reconnaissance, that's yours, sir. That's your legacy. You revolutionized how SEALs operate in denied territory. He paused, swallowing hard. And then in 2003, they told us you were killed in Afghanistan, helping with training operations. But you were 50 years old then, so I figured maybe it was a different Marcus Webb, but the call sign matched, and... He trailed off, staring at Marcus in his wheelchair. "Sir, you're supposed to be dead. Twice." Marcus's weathered face softened slightly, something almost like grim humor crossing his features. "I don't die easy, apparently." He gestured to his missing leg. "This was Fallujah, 2007. I was technically retired from the teams, but got called back for advisory work. Wrong place, wrong time. IED hit our convoy. Lost 3 good men that day. I just lost the leg." The young SEAL's face was a mixture of reverence and confusion. "Sir, why isn't your name everywhere? Why don't people know? You should have statues, memorials. Ghost One is legendary in the teams, but nobody knows who you really are. It's just a story, a call sign without a face." Marcus shook his head slowly. "That's how I wanted it, son. The mission was what mattered, not the recognition. I did my job. The men came home. That was enough." But the older Vietnam vet across the room stood up now, moving closer with the careful steps of someone whose body had also been broken by war. "I knew your swim buddy," he said to Marcus, his voice thick with emotion. "Danny Rodriguez. He was in my unit for a while in 72, after you guys got back from Phantom River. He told me about you. Said you got shot in the neck on day 7 of that escape. Should have killed you. You stuffed the wound with cloth from your own uniform and kept moving. Didn't even tell your team you'd been hit for another 2 days because you didn't want them worrying about you when they needed to focus on survival. Danny said you navigated by the stars, moved only at night, hunted for food with your bare hands, and refused to be captured. He said following you through that jungle was like following a ghost. You were there, leading them, keeping them alive, but you moved like you didn't exist, like you could disappear into shadows whenever the enemy got close. That's why they called you Ghost One, the first ghost, the one who couldn't be caught." Tears were visible in the older vet's eyes now. Danny made it home because of you. He got to meet his daughter. She's a doctor now in Phoenix. He died in 1998, cancer, but he lived a full life after Vietnam because you brought him back. He never forgot you. None of them did. Marcus's jaw clenched, emotion he'd kept buried for decades threatening to surface. The young SEAL was still standing at attention, and Marcus noticed now that other people in the waiting room were watching, several holding phones, not filming but searching something. A middle-aged woman looked up from her screen, her eyes wide. "There's a declassified document here about Operation Phantom River. It says, Marcus Webb, call sign Ghost 1, Navy SEAL Team 1, was recommended for the Medal of Honor, but the mission was classified for 30 years. By the time it was declassified, the Navy had lost track of him. They thought he was dead." She looked at Marcus with something like wonder. "Sir, they've been trying to find you to give you the recognition you earned. The Navy SEAL Foundation has been searching for Ghost 1 for over a decade." The young SEAL finally moved, but only to pull out his phone with shaking hands. "Sir, with your permission, I need to make a call. My commanding officer needs to know you're here. This isn't right, sir. You sitting in a VA waiting room, unknown, unrecognized. That's not okay." Marcus wanted to protest, to say it didn't matter, that he was fine with anonymity. But something in the young man's face, in the faces of the veterans around him who now understood who he was, stopped him. Maybe he'd carried the weight of being forgotten long enough. Maybe it was time to let someone else carry some of it. "Make your call, son," he said quietly. Within an hour, the clinic was visited by a Navy captain, the local SEAL Team 5 commander, who arrived in dress whites and personally escorted Marcus not to his physical therapy appointment, but to a private meeting with the Naval Special Warfare Command. Within a month, Marcus Webb stood on a stage at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, in front of hundreds of active SEALs and their families, and was formally awarded the Navy Cross for Operation Phantom River, a ceremony delayed by 54 years. The young SEAL who'd asked his call sign that day stood in formation, watching with tears in his eyes as Ghost 1 finally received the honor he'd never sought but had always deserved. The SEAL community rallied around Marcus, ensuring his medical care was prioritized, his story documented, his place in history secured. He became a regular visitor to Buddhist training classes, not as an instructor but as a living reminder of what it meant to be a SEAL. Not the glory or the recognition, but the mission, the brotherhood, the absolute refusal to leave anyone behind or to quit when survival seemed impossible. Young SEALs would see him in his wheelchair and learn that strength wasn't about physical perfection, but about the will to keep moving forward no matter what. The young SEAL who'd recognized the call sign that day, Petty Officer First Class Jason Torres, would later say that meeting Ghost 1 changed his entire understanding of service. He'd joined the SEALs for the prestige, the challenge, the pride of being elite. But Marcus Webb taught him something deeper, that the greatest warriors are often the quietest, that true heroism doesn't seek spotlights, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply show up, do your job, and bring everyone home, even if nobody ever knows your name. Marcus Webb lived out his years with the respect he'd always deserved, surrounded by a brotherhood that never forgot, speaking to young SEALs about leadership, sacrifice, and the difference between seeking glory and earning it through silent dedication. If you believe that real heroes don't need recognition to validate their worth, but deserve it anyway, subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that legends walk among us quietly, that respect should never be withheld because someone doesn't look important, and that sometimes the most powerful question you can ask is simply, what's your story? Because you never know when you're standing in the presence of a ghost who refused to die and brought everyone home.